The story of World War II is often told through sweeping maps, the clash of armies, and the decisions of generals. But beneath those great movements lay the lives of ordinary men who carried rifles, wore worn boots, and marched through mud and fire into the unknown. To understand the war is to step into their shoes, to feel the weight of their gear digging into tired shoulders, to hear the whispers in the dark before an attack, to taste the stale bread in a trench, and to know the haunting silence after the chaos of battle. It begins with young men, many barely out of their teenage years, called from farms, factories, and city streets, transformed from civilians into soldiers. The induction centers were filled with nervous energy, laughter masking fear, as they lined up for haircuts, uniforms, and instructions, shouted by stern voices. Training was swift and merciless, stripping away individuality, replacing it with discipline, routine, and an unspoken brotherhood. The rifle became an extension of the body, the pack a second skin, and the soldier learned not only how to march but how to endure. Letters from home were tucked in shirt pockets, photographs hidden inside helmets, the only fragile link between a new world of violence and the life left behind. As the war spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, these young men were carried across oceans to foreign shores they had never imagined. The front line was never the same, shifting landscapes of endless possibilities for suffering and survival. On the Western Front, soldiers trudged through the bocage of France, fields crisscrossed with hedgerows that concealed ambushes. In Italy, they climbed mountains under relentless artillery fire, and in the Ardennes, they faced the unforgiving chill of winter with boots that froze to the ground. In the Pacific, they marched through steaming jungles where every step carried the possibility of disease or sudden death from a hidden enemy. The front line was not a single place, but a shifting, breathing presence, and every soldier knew that at any moment a quiet lull could be shattered by the crack of gunfire or the whistling descent of a mortar. Life on the front line was defined by waiting as much as by fighting. Hours stretched endlessly in trenches, foxholes, and bunkers as men cleaned their rifles, smoked cigarettes down to the last scrap of paper, or wrote hurried letters by candlelight. There was no comfort, only stolen moments of rest on the cold ground, helmets used as pillows, blankets shared between comrades. Hunger gnawed constantly. Rations were tins of meat, biscuits so hard they cracked teeth, coffee that was often more mud than liquid. When supplies faltered, soldiers foraged or went hungry, their stomachs hollow as they marched into battle. Hygiene was a luxury. Mud clung to everything, lice nested in seams, and disease spread easily. Yet through this discomfort, men found resilience in humor, telling jokes, teasing one another, singing songs in the dead of night, to remind themselves they were still human in a world that had become mechanical with destruction. The bond between soldiers was unlike anything else, forged under fire, unspoken, but stronger than steel. They learned to rely on the man next to them, to trust that in the darkest moments someone would cover their flank, share the last drop of water, or carry them to safety. These friendships were often fleeting, cut short by the brutal lottery of war. A conversation at dusk could be silenced by dawn. Yet the memory of those bonds lingered, shaping men for the rest of their lives. The loss of comrades carved wounds that no medal or victory could heal. Soldiers often spoke of how they fought less for nations or ideologies and more for each other, for the small circle of faces they saw every day in mud and blood. When the guns erupted, life became a blur of sound and terror. The roar of artillery, the shriek of shells, the staccato of machine guns. It was a cacophony that overwhelmed the senses. The ground shook, the air filled with dirt and smoke. The heart raced with the knowledge that death could strike in any instant. Soldiers learned to move without thinking, to dive, to crawl, to press themselves into the earth as if becoming one with it. Fear was constant, but courage was the act of moving forward anyway, of standing up when every instinct screamed to hide. The sights etched into memory were unbearable, the fallen bodies of friends, the cries of the wounded, the chaos of medics racing to save lives with limited tools. In the midst of destruction, humanity persisted. A hand reaching out to drag a comrade to safety, a whispered prayer, a moment of stillness when the firing ceased and men caught their breath, aware they had survived another minute. Beyond the battlefield, there was the constant shadow of uncertainty. Soldiers did not know when the next attack would come, or if they would live to see another sunrise. Sleep was restless, haunted by nightmares even before dreams had a chance to form. The sound of a twig snapping could trigger panic, the memory of ambushes etched deep into nerves. Rain turned trenches into rivers, summer heat brought clouds of flies, winter froze bones. And yet through all of this, men adapted. They fashioned stoves out of cans, built makeshift shelters, carved playing cards from scraps of paper. They found ways to mark birthdays with stolen chocolate or sang carols on Christmas Eve, their voices mingling with the distant thunder of war. These small acts of normalcy were lifelines, reminders that beyond the battlefield lay a world worth returning to. The letters home were the most precious treasure. Soldiers clutched them like talismans, reading and rereading words until the paper frayed. They spoke of longing, of mothers and fathers, wives and sweethearts, of children growing up unseen. The act of writing back was equally vital, a chance to reach across oceans and assure loved ones that they were still alive, still holding on. But not every letter was of comfort. The dreaded telegrams delivered news of loss, tearing families apart thousands of miles away. The price of war counted not only in soldiers' lives, but in the hearts of those waiting at home. The psychological toll was immense. Words like shell shock and combat fatigue barely touched the reality of what soldiers endured. The constant tension, the images of horror, the feeling of being hunted, wore men down. Some shut down emotionally, moving through each day like shadows of themselves. Others clung desperately to rituals, polishing boots or cleaning rifles not because they had to, but because it gave a sense of order in chaos. There were moments of breakdown, of tears shed quietly in the dark, of outbursts of rage at the futility of it all. Yet most endured, carrying scars invisible to the eye but indelible in the soul. World War II frontline soldiers also lived with the knowledge that their struggle was part of something larger, something that stretched far beyond their own survival. They knew they were cogs in a vast machine, yet they also carried the burden of history. The liberation of towns, the sight of civilians waving flags, the discovery of concentration camps, these moments reminded them that their suffering had meaning. They were witnesses to both the darkest and most hopeful chapters of human existence. For many, the war defined them forever, shaping their understanding of life, death, and duty. As the war dragged on, years blended together. New recruits arrived, nervous and untested, and were swiftly hardened by the realities of combat. Veterans, wearied by experience, guided them, passing down survival skills and quiet wisdom. The front line became a revolving door of faces, some staying, some gone too soon. The rhythm of life was unchanging. March, dig, wait, fight, rest, repeat. Days felt endless, yet years disappeared in a haze of smoke and fire. And when victory finally came, it was met with relief, joy, and an aching grief for all that had been lost. The return home was not the end of the story. Soldiers stepped off trains and ships to the cheers of crowds, embraced by families, but inside they carried the war with them. They struggled to explain what they had seen, to reconcile the quiet of peacetime with the noise still echoing in their minds. Some found solace in rebuilding, in starting families, in creating lives their fallen comrades never could. Others remained restless, haunted, seeking answers in silence. The war had given them purpose and taken so much in return. They were no longer the boys who had once left home. They were men forged in fire, forever marked by the front lines. The life of a soldier on the front lines of World War II was a life of endurance, sacrifice, and unshakable resilience. It was a life measured not only in battles fought, but in moments of humanity preserved amid destruction. It was the story of millions who stood in the face of unimaginable hardship and held the line, not because they wanted glory, but because they had no choice. They bore the weight of history, and in doing so they shaped the world that followed. Their courage was not in being unafraid, but in living through fear, day after day, night after night, until the guns finally fell silent. And when we remember them, We are not only recalling a war, but honoring the lives lived within it. The laughter, the friendships, the tears, the unspoken promises, and the will to endure against all odds. For in their struggle lies the essence of humanity's fight for survival, dignity, and freedom, and their legacy reminds us that even in the darkest of times, the light of courage burns brightest. Because the life of a soldier on the front lines of World War II was nothing less than the story of ordinary men carrying the extraordinary weight of saving the world. Their footsteps may have faded, but their sacrifice echoes forever in the soul of history.